Let's take a look at some little-known facts about Methodists and the government of the United States. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was a priest of the Church of England, the Anglican Church. He was determined to stay loyal to English government and the Anglican Church, and did so throughout his life. The 39 Articles of Religion of the Church of England, the doctrinal statement of the Anglican Church, were adopted in a Latin version in 1562 and in English in 1571. John Wesley believed he never violated these articles. Methodism in America began while the states were English colonies. After the American Revolution, with many people not served by the Anglican Church, American Methodists believed they needed to form a separate church. Recognizing the need in America, John Wesley abridged and revised the Anglican Articles of Religion from 39 to 24 articles. American Methodists adopted the 24 articles provided by John Wesley and added an additional article, adopting the 25 as the Articles of Religion of the Methodist Episcopal Church at the Christmas Conference of 1784. The new article adopted by Americans and added became Article number 23, entitled, "Of the Rulers of the United States of America." It reads, "The President, the Congress, the General Assemblies, the Governors, and the Councils of State, as the delegates of the people, are the rulers of the United States of America, according to the division of power made to them by the Constitution of the United States and by the constitutions of their respective states. And the said states are a sovereign and independent nation, and ought not to be subject to any foreign jurisdiction." Now this may seem to be a strange bit of text to add to articles of religion, but if we look back, we can find that there are some principles having to do with government that are found in the Old and New Testament. We find some of those lessons in the Torah, the Law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. We find that as slaves in Egypt, the basic needs of the Hebrew people were met, but they had to endure the tyranny of Pharaoh. They were compelled to do hard labor without regard to their welfare. Then male children were ordered to be put to death. This tyranny was so oppressive, they cried out to God for deliverance. Once delivered from Egypt, the Israelites were promised by God that their needs would be met as long as they remained faithful and obeyed the Lord. They had many demonstrations of the power of God to provide a basis for their faith. However, when their faith in God was tested by adversity, many expressed the desire to return to Egypt to have their needs of food, water, and security met, forgetting their harsh treatment and the murder of their sons. As in the days of Moses, it is true today that when people turn to government to meet all of their needs, they are oppressed. But when they exercise faith in God and work hard to meet their own needs, they are blessed and experience freedom. It is also true that whenever adversity comes, many people are willing to trade their freedom for security. However, history shows that the result of giving all power to government is invariably enslavement to those in power. The Founding Fathers of the United States recognized a role for government in promoting general welfare, but that the people should be self-reliant under God. Genesis teaches that all people, male and female, are created in the image of God. Leviticus requires the loving of one's neighbor as oneself. The law of Moses requires the Israelites to have one law for everyone, no favoritism of anyone, and no denial of rights to anyone. This is the basis for equal protection under the law in the United States. No individuals or groups are above the law, none can oppress others, and none are singled out for harsher treatment than others. The Christmas Conference of 1784 adopted a rule requiring all Methodists to work toward the elimination of slavery in the United States and toward the freedom of those who were currently enslaved. John Wesley himself was passionately opposed to slavery, noting in his writings the many specific ways in which slavery and the slave trade violated the rights of the enslaved. Only 4 days before his death in 1791, Wesley wrote a letter encouraging abolition, calling slavery that execrable villainy, which is the scandal of religion, of England, and of human nature. Reading this morning a tract wrote by a poor African, I was particularly struck by that circumstance that a man who has a black skin, being wronged or outraged by a white man, can have no redress, it being a law in all our colonies that the oath of a black against a white goes for nothing. What villainy is this? Under the law of Moses, rulers were not allowed to be priests, only those the Lord specifically designated, and it was never a ruler. The role of rulers, including a king, was to maintain compliance with the Mosaic law and to provide for a separate priesthood, as stipulated in Deuteronomy 17:18-20. This was different from other nations in the ancient Near East, whose kings were considered gods and or the high priests of their religious worship. King Saul was severely reprimanded by the prophet Samuel for trying to take the role of a priest. The need for separation of church and state was recognized by Roger Williams of Rhode Island in a pamphlet in 1644. The purpose of this separation was to prevent government from interfering in people's personal religious beliefs, not to protect government from values taught by Judaism or Christianity. Thomas Jefferson affirmed the protection of faith and worship from interference by the federal government in a letter to Baptist women in Danbury, Connecticut in 1802. It was never meant to prevent moral values grounded in Judaism or Christianity, such as the abolition of slavery, from serving as the basis of legislation. Separation of church and state did not exist in Europe. In England, during the time of Wesley, and even now, the King or Queen of England is the head of the Church of England, the Anglican Church. The poor experience of mixing government and religion in Europe served as an incentive for Americans to preserve the independence of churches in the United States. There are lessons about government in the New Testament as well. On the issue of paying taxes, Jesus said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." In Romans 13, Paul taught that rulers are ministers of God to maintain order in society, which recognizes the sinful tendency of men. Likewise, Peter taught, "Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor." One purpose of the book of Acts was to show that Christians were good citizens of the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, when there is a serious difference with what God has commanded, God must be obeyed, as Jesus, Peter, and Paul demonstrated in their lives. The political situation made it impossible for the first Christians to bring about an end to slavery, so instructions to slaves had to accommodate that institution. Nevertheless, Paul's writings go beyond the Old Testament in recognizing the humanity of slaves and seeking the freedom of all people. Paul encourages slaves to seek freedom if at all possible in 1 Corinthians 7:21. In Paul's letter to Philemon, he encourages a master to see his slave as an equal before God and to grant the slave freedom. Similarly, where freedom is impossible, Paul counsels masters to see their slaves as equals before God. Recognizing that all people are created in the image of God, the Declaration of Independence reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." This principle is recognized by Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863. when he said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This principle was also recognized by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28, 1963, almost exactly 100 years after Lincoln's remarks, when he said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, John Wesley said these words, Whether you are a Christian or no, show yourself a man. Be not more savage than a lion or a bear. Liberty is the right of every human creature as soon as he breathes the vital air, and no human law can deprive him of that right which he derives from the law of nature. If, therefore, you have any regard to justice, to say nothing of mercy, nor the revealed law of God, render unto all their due. Give liberty to whom liberty is due, that is, to every child of man, to every partaker of human nature. The Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights recognize that man's tendency to sin can easily lead to the abuse of power. The rights of citizens are specified in the Bill of Rights. These are important freedoms that every American citizen, every Christian, every Methodist, should be aware of. Vigilance is required because those in power will often not want to respect these rights. And unfortunately, it is true that in our time, many people in the federal and state legislatures do not want to bother themselves with respecting the rights that have been guaranteed to us by the Bill of Rights. It therefore falls to us as citizens to recognize this and to demand that our politicians respect those rights which the Constitution has recognized are ours. Rights that are not ours because the government sees fit to give them to us. Rights that are ours because they are God-given by our Creator. Recognizing that man's tendency to sin can easily lead to the abuse of power, power in the United States is split between 3 branches of government and made accountable to citizens through elections. 3 branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial, check and balance one another. The final check is given to people to be exercised through elections based upon the free flow of information provided by the press, where the press is checked as various news organizations compete with one another for the public's trust. Thus, Christians have a responsibility to be educated, well-informed, and to exercise freedom of speech and to vote. Since power is placed in the hands of the people to voice their opinion and to vote, they must use this power for good. As Proverbs says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. We can conclude, therefore, that Methodists included a section on the government of the United States under the United States Constitution in their Articles of Religion because they believed there were many principles derived from Scripture encapsulated into it. In George Washington's farewell address on September 1796, he said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, Where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle.